You get that ink out of a cereal box, old-timer? The voice was young, sharp, and soaked in the kind of arrogance that comes from being elite and knowing it. Vincent Vinny Romano didn't look up from his morning coffee. He was 83 years old, and the simple act of stirring honey into the dark liquid deserved more attention than the pair of mountains standing over his corner booth at Rosie's diner, just outside Fort Bragg. He could feel their presence, the sheer physical density of them. They were big men carved from confidence and combat experience, wearing civilian clothes that couldn't hide their lethal profession. The one who had spoken, a man with a hard jaw and predator's eyes, leaned forward, planting his scarred knuckles on the worn formica table. "I'm talking to you," the operator said, gesturing with his chin toward Vinny's left forearm. There, on the sun-spotted and wrinkled skin, was a faded tattoo. It was a simple design, a black eagle with spread wings, clutching a lightning bolt in its talons. Below it, 3 Roman numerals. The lines were thick, the ink blurred by decades. It looked less like a proud military emblem and more like a forgotten doodle from another era. "What about it?" Vinny's voice was gravelly, a low rumble that seemed to cost him effort. He finally lifted his gaze, his eyes gray-green and clouded with age, holding a placid stillness that seemed to unnerve the young operator. The second man, quieter with a thoughtful expression, nudged his partner. "Briggs, leave it alone." Briggs ignored him. "I'm just curious what it's supposed to represent. Some kind of biker thing? You in a club?" He smirked. "What's it called?" "The rolling wheelchairs." The diner, a cozy place called Rosie's that had been serving soldiers for 40 years, had been humming with a quiet breakfast rush. Now a pocket of silence was expanding from Vinny's booth. The waitress, Maria, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, froze with a coffee pot in her hand. Regulars who knew Vinny, the quiet old man who came in for black coffee and wheat toast every Wednesday morning, shot nervous glances at the 2 imposing operators. Vinny took a slow sip of his coffee, placed the mug down with a steady hand. "It's just something from a long time ago." "A long time ago," Briggs mimicked, drawing the words out mockingly. "You serve? What were you? A supply clerk? Maybe pushing papers at some rear echelon base?" The condescension was thick enough to cut. He was testing, prodding, enjoying the perceived power dynamic. He and his partner were Delta Force, the tip of the spear, the most elite fighting force America had ever produced. This old man was just a relic, a piece of living history that had forgotten to crumble into dust. "Something like that," Vinny said, his eyes drifting toward the window as if the conversation was already a distant memory. This infuriated Briggs. He expected deference, or at least a flicker of intimidation. He was getting nothing but calm indifference. "You know," Briggs continued, his voice hardening, "we don't like it when people pretend to be something they're not. It's called stolen valor. People who weren't there, wearing things they didn't earn." He pointed a thick finger at the tattoo again. "That ink on your arm. I've never seen, not in any book, not in any unit database. And trust me, I know them all." The second operator, Martinez, finally spoke up, his voice low and warning. "He's not claiming anything, man. We're off duty. Just let him drink his coffee." "No," Briggs snapped, his focus locked on Vinny. "I want to know. I want to hear the war story that goes with your 50-cent tattoo." "What's it mean, old man?" Vinny's gaze returned from the window and settled on Briggs. It wasn't a challenging look. It was one of profound, soul-deep weariness, as if he were seeing not just this arrogant young man, but a long line of them stretching back through time. "It means something," Vinny said, his voice barely above a whisper. "To the people it's supposed." Briggs laughed, a harsh barking sound. "That's it? That's all you got?" He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss. "I think you're full of it. I think you spent your war peeling potatoes and got that thing done in some back alley shop to impress girls." The disrespect was palpable now, hanging in the air thick and sour. Maria placed her coffee pot down with a sharp clink. The cook in the back had stopped flipping pancakes. The quiet murmur of the diner had died completely. Everyone was watching. Briggs straightened up, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. He'd won. He'd broken the old man's silence, even if he hadn't gotten the reaction he wanted. He turned to Martinez. "See? Nothing. Just another phony." As he spoke, he made his final critical mistake. He reached out and dismissively tapped his finger on Vinny's tattoo. The touch was light, almost casual, but for Vinny, it was like a lightning strike. The scent of coffee and bacon grease vanished, replaced by the thick metallic smell of blood and wet jungle earth. The clatter of plates became the distant rhythmic thump of Huey rotors. He wasn't in a vinyl booth anymore. He was crouched in humid triple canopy darkness, rain dripping from massive leaves around him. A young man's voice, tight with pain, whispered in his ear, "Stay with me, Romano. Just stay with me." He remembered the makeshift needle, a sharpened piece of bamboo dipped in gunpowder and ink, done in silence in a hidden camp, deep in a country they weren't supposed to be in. A pact made between the 13 survivors of a mission that had officially never happened. Ezekiel, the lightning bolt, the number 13. It wasn't decoration, it was a scar. It was a promise to remember the ones who didn't make it home. While Briggs was basking in his performance for the silent diner, Maria was already moving. She had seen enough. Vinny Romano was more than a customer. He was a fixture, a quiet gentleman who always asked about her grandson and left tips that were far too generous for a simple cup of coffee. Seeing him humiliated by these two monuments to arrogance ignited a cold fury in her. She couldn't confront them physically, but she wasn't helpless. She slipped into the small cluttered office behind the kitchen, closing the door softly. Maria pulled out her phone, fingers moving quickly. She didn't call the police. What would they do? Ask the men to leave? This was a different kind of problem, one that required a different kind of solution. Her nephew Danny worked as a staff sergeant in the XIII headquarters building. A long shot, but it was the only shot she had. Danny answered on the second ring, his voice crisp and professional. "Sergeant Martinez." "Danny, it's Tia Maria," she whispered, her voice tight with urgency. "Listen, I don't have much time. There are 2 of your special ops guys here at the diner, and they're harassing one of my regulars, an old Tia. If they're causing trouble, you should call the MPs." "No, you don't understand," Maria insisted, her voice dropping lower. "The old man's name is Vincent Romano. They're mocking a tattoo on his arm, an eagle with a lightning bolt and the number. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It stretched for 3, 4, 5 seconds. When Danny's voice returned, it was completely different. The professional crispness was gone, replaced by strained, high-pitched tension. "Say that again. Describe the tattoo exactly." Maria described it one more time, adding details about the Roman numerals. "And the name is Vincent Romano?" Danny asked, his voice tight. "Yes. Now are you going to do something or not?" "Stay where you are. Don't let them leave," Danny said, and the line went. Inside the sprawling headquarters of Joint Special Operations Command, Staff Sergeant Danny Martinez felt cold sweat break out on his forehead. The name and symbol weren't in any database he had access to, but he'd been working in special operations long enough to know the ghost stories. Project Phoenix, the men who came before Delta Force, before SEAL Team 6, the operators who wrote the playbook in blood and shadow during Vietnam's most classified mission. General Patricia Hayes, the 3-star commander of JSOC, was in the middle of a classified briefing with component commanders. Danny knew the protocol. You do not interrupt the general during a CF brief, unless the building is on fire or World War III has started. He decided this was close enough. He walked to the heavy door, took a deep breath, and knocked. A colonel opened it a crack, his face a mask of annoyance. "What is it, Sergeant?" "I need to speak with the general. It's urgent." "It can wait, sir. With all due respect, it can't." Danny pushed past him, his heart hammering. All eyes in the room, the most dangerous and powerful military leaders in the country, turned to Danny. General Hayes looked up from the head of the table, her eyes like chips of blue ice. "Sergeant, this had better be the end of the world." Danny walked straight to her, his training kicking in. He leaned down and spoke in a low, clear voice that only she could hear. "Ma'am, I apologize for the interruption. I just received a call from my aunt off post. A man named Vincent Romano is being harassed at Rosie's diner by 2 active duty operators from the unit." The general's expression didn't change. She was famous for her composure under pressure. "They are questioning his service, ma'am," Danny continued, his voice trembling slightly, "specifically mocking his tattoo." He paused. An eagle with lightning bolt and the Roman numeral 13. The change was instantaneous and terrifying. The mask of composure didn't just crack, it vaporized. The color drained from General Hayes's face, replaced by a dark, thunderous rage that seemed to suck the oxygen from the room. The other commanders flinched back, stunned. Hayes rose from her chair so quickly it screeched back and nearly toppled over. Her voice, when she spoke, was not a shout. It was a low guttural command that sliced through the silence. Get my personal detail. Get my vehicles. She looked at the other officers at the table, her eyes blazing. This meeting is over. Back at the diner, the tension had reached its breaking point. Briggs, having received no satisfying reaction from Vinny, decided to escalate. His patience was gone, replaced by a mean-spirited need to see the old man break. All right, Grandpa, he said, his voice hard. I think we've had enough of your stolen valor act. He grabbed Vinny's upper arm, his grip surprisingly strong. Let's take a little walk outside. You and me can discuss respect. He was threatening to physically assault an 83-year-old man in a public diner. A collective gasp went through the room. Martinez grabbed his partner's shoulder. Briggs. No. What are you doing? But Briggs was beyond reason. He started to pull Vinny from the booth. That's when the sound reached them. It wasn't the familiar wail of police sirens. It was deeper, more ominous. The rumble of powerful engines moving at high speed. Heads turned toward the window. 3 black government-plated Chevrolet Suburbans had screamed into the parking lot, executing a perfect tactical formation around the diner's entrance. Before the vehicles had even stopped, doors flew open and men in sharp service dress uniforms emerged. They were not soldiers in combat gear. They were the command security detail. Stone-faced sergeants major and master sergeants, who moved with unnerving synchronized precision, forming a perimeter that turned a simple diner into a high-security zone. Briggs and Martinez froze. They recognized the vehicles. They recognized the security detail. Their blood ran cold. The rear door of the lead Suburban opened, and out stepped General Patricia Hayes. The 3 silver stars on her collar glittered in the morning. She didn't look at anyone. Her eyes, burning with cold fire, were fixed on the diner's front door. She strode toward it, her detail falling in silently behind her. The bell above the door jingled softly as the general entered. The room was so quiet that the sound was like a gunshot. She filled the doorway, her presence sucking all air from the small space. She ignored the stunned operators. She ignored the gawking patrons. Her gaze swept the room and found the man in the booth. She walked directly to Vincent Romano. She stopped, her polished black shoes inches from the table. Briggs still had his hand on Vinny's arm. The general's eyes flicked down to that hand, and the look in them was so venomous that Briggs snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned. Then General Hayes did something that no one in that diner could have predicted. She clicked her heels together, back ramrod straight, and in the greasy spoon diner surrounded by the smell of bacon and coffee, the highest-ranking Special Operations Commander in the United States military snapped to the sharpest, most profound position of attention and rendered a perfect textbook salute to the frail, quiet old man in the booth. Time seemed to stop. After a long moment, the general lowered her voice, when she spoke, was thick with an emotion no one had ever heard from her before. Vincent, it's been too long. Vinny looked up at her, and a faint, sad smile touched his lips. Patricia, you got old. General Hayes allowed herself a small grim smile. She then turned her attention to the 2 operators, who looked as if they were about to be physically ill. Her eyes were arctic voids. You, she said to Briggs. You questioned this man. You questioned his tattoo. Briggs could only manage a choked, stammering sound. The general didn't wait for an answer. With slow, deliberate movements, she unbuttoned the cuff of her right sleeve and rolled it up past her wrist, past an expensive watch. There, on the skin of the 3-star general, was the exact same tattoo. The eagle, the lightning bolt, the Roman numeral 3. Hers was newer, the lines crisper, but it was an identical match to the faded ink on Vinny's arm. A wave of shock rippled through the diner. Let me tell you who you were speaking to, the general said, her voice low and dangerous yet loud enough for everyone to hear. This is Vincent Romano. Before there was Delta Force, before there was SEAL Team 6, there was a handful of men sent into the dark to do the impossible. They were called Project Phoenix. They were ghosts. Their missions were never recorded. Their names were never spoken. General Hayes stepped closer to Briggs and Martinez, her voice dropping even further, but carrying to every corner of the diner. This man and 12 others were the founding members of the very tradition you think you represent. In 1971, on a mission so classified it's still blacked out in every file, his team was compromised deep inside Cambodia. They were hunted for 18 days by 4 entire regiments. She paused, letting the weight of that sink in. Vincent Romano carried a wounded teammate. Me, when I was a young lieutenant, on his back for the last 3 days through enemy territory to reach the extraction point." The general's voice grew quieter, more personal. "Of the 13 men who wore this mark, only 3 are alive today. You are looking at 2 of them." She let that information crush Briggs and Martinez beneath its weight. The patrons stared, mouths agape, looking at the quiet old man in the booth, with completely new understanding. They were in the presence of a legend they never knew existed. "The 13th man didn't make it to the helicopter," Hayes continued. "Vincent stayed behind to provide covering fire while we extracted. He held off an entire company for 40 minutes with nothing but a rifle and determination. When we finally got him out, he was the last man on that bird." General Hayes turned back to her operators. The rebuke, when it came, was not loud. It was a quiet, surgical evisceration. "You wear the uniform of the quiet professional. That is our creed. Today you forgot the quiet part. You forgot the professional part. You forgot that every single thing you have, every piece of gear you use, every tactic you employ, was paid for in blood by men like him." She looked them up and down with utter contempt. "You forgot to respect your elders. You forgot everything that mattered." Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more authority than any shout. "My office, Euro 800 tomorrow. Be prepared to explain why you deserve to continue wearing that uniform." She had just put their careers in elite special operations on the line. As the 2 young operators stood there, broken and humiliated, Vincent Romano finally spoke. He pushed himself slowly out of the booth, standing on unsteady legs. He looked not at the general, but at the pale, shattered faces of Briggs and Martinez. His voice was soft, devoid of anger or triumph. "The tattoo doesn't make the man," he said, his gray-green eyes holding theirs. "The man makes the tattoo mean something." All this he gestured vaguely at the general. "The uniforms, the display of military might, comes and goes. But your character, sons, that's the only thing you truly own. Try not to lose it." With that, he looked at his old comrade. "Buy me a coffee, Patricia. We've got some catching up to do." As General Hayes put a steadying hand on Vinny's shoulder, a final image bloomed in his mind, not of jungle combat, but of a quiet moment after, applying that same eagle tattoo to a young lieutenant's arm with a bamboo needle, sealing a bond that would last 50 years. The fallout from the incident at Rosie's diner was swift and decisive. General Hayes didn't just discipline Briggs and Martinez. She saw a symptom of a larger problem. A generation of warriors so focused on their own elite status that they had forgotten their heritage. Within a month, she instituted a new mandatory block of instruction for every special operations candidate. It was called Foundation, and it was a deep dive into the history and lineage of their profession. The classes weren't taught by active duty instructors, but by a rotating roster of vetted veterans from conflicts that predated modern special operations. Men like Vincent Romano were flown in to speak directly to young candidates, sharing stories and imparting lessons that could only be learned through time and sacrifice. Briggs and Martinez were not dishonorably discharged. General Hayes believed that would be too easy. Instead, they were reassigned to become the permanent administrative staff for the new Foundation program, responsible for coordinating travel, setting up classrooms, and ensuring the veteran speakers had everything they needed. For the next 2 years, their duty was to serve the very men they had once failed to respect, forced to listen to stories of quiet, unassuming heroism day after day. It was a subtle but profound form of penance. The program became so successful that other military branches requested similar curricula. The lessons weren't just about respecting elders. They were about understanding that every generation of warriors stood on the shoulders of those who came before. Maria, the waitress who had made the crucial phone call, found herself invited to speak at several military spouse events about the importance of supporting veterans in civilian communities. She always declined, saying she had just done what any decent person would do. About 18 months later, Vinny was at a local grocery store when a young man in civilian clothes approached him. It was Martinez, no longer carrying himself with the swagger of elite forces, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned humility. "Mr. Romano," he said respectfully. "I don't know if you remember me." "I remember," Vinny said simply. Martinez swallowed hard. "What I did that day was inexcusable. I was arrogant, I was disrespectful, and I was wrong. I wanted you to know that I've learned from it. I'm trying to be better." There was no grand speech, no dramatic plea for forgiveness. Just a simple, honest admission. Vinny studied him for a moment, then extended his hand. Martinez took it, surprised by the strength in the old man's grip. "We all have things to learn, son," Vinny said, his voice the same quiet rumble it always was. "The important thing is that you keep learning." He gave a small nod, then turned back to his shopping cart. The conversation for him was already over. He had never been one to hold grudges. There had been too much real war for that luxury. 2 years after the diner incident, the Foundation program had become the gold standard for special operations training across all branches of military service. Vincent Romano found himself busier in his 80s than he had been since his retirement, traveling between bases to share stories that had been classified for decades. But it wasn't just about war stories. The program had evolved into something deeper, a comprehensive examination of what it meant to serve with honor, regardless of the era or technology involved. During one session at Fort Bragg, a young Green Beret candidate raised his hand. "Sir, with all the advanced technology we have now, how relevant are the old methods?" Vinny considered the question carefully. "Son, technology changes, equipment gets better, but the fundamentals, courage, integrity, putting your brothers before yourself, those things are eternal." He gestured to the faded tattoo on his arm. "This mark isn't about the mission we completed or the enemy we defeated. It's about the promise we made to each other and to every soldier who would come after us. That promise doesn't have an expiration date." The room was silent as the weight of his words settled over the young operators. "You think because you have better gear, better intelligence, better support, that somehow makes you superior to those who came before." Vinny continued, "Every advantage you have was paid for by someone else's sacrifice. Your job isn't to look down on the past, it's to honor it by being worthy of it." After the session, Briggs approached him. The former Delta operator had been working with the program for 2 years, and the change in him was remarkable. The arrogance was gone, replaced by genuine humility and deep respect for the veterans he now served. "Romano," Briggs said, "I wanted to thank you for giving me the chance to learn from my mistake. Working with these men, hearing their stories, it's changed my perspective completely." Vinny nodded approvingly. "That's the point, son. Every generation thinks they invented warfare, but there's nothing new under the sun, just new ways to apply old truths." The program had also created an unexpected benefit. It connected different generations of warriors in ways that had never existed before. Vietnam veterans found themselves mentoring Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, while Korean War survivors shared wisdom with active duty special operators. The tattoo that had once been mocked in a diner had become a symbol of something larger, the unbroken chain of service that connected every American warrior across time and conflict. General Hayes, now retired, often spoke about the program at military conferences. "We realized we were creating technically proficient operators who had no understanding of their professional heritage," she would explain. Vincent Romano and others like him reminded us that being elite isn't just about what you can do, it's about understanding why you do it and who made it possible. The quiet heroes who had served in the shadows for decades finally had their voices heard, ensuring their lessons would guide future generations. 5 years after the incident that changed everything, Vincent Romano had officially retired from the Foundation program, but his influence continued to ripple through the special operations community. At 88, he spent his days quietly, though former students still sought him out for guidance. His small house near Fayetteville had become an unofficial pilgrimage site for young operators struggling with the weight of their responsibilities. They would arrive unannounced, sit on his front porch, and listen to stories that couldn't be found in any manual. One afternoon, a young Navy SEAL named Peterson sat across from Vinny, struggling with survivor's guilt after losing teammates in Afghanistan. "I keep thinking I should have done something different," Peterson said, his voice hollow. "Maybe if I'd been faster, smarter." Vinny was quiet for a long moment, watching clouds drift across the Carolina sky. "Son, I've carried that same weight for 50 years. Lost good men in places whose names I can't even tell you. Spent decades wondering if there was something I could have done differently." He turned to look at the young SEAL. "What I learned is that guilt can either crush you or teach you. The men you lost, they didn't die so you could spend the rest of your life feeling sorry for yourself. They died doing their job, same as they'd want you to keep doing yours." Peterson nodded, tears in his eyes. "How do you live with it?" "You honor them by being worthy of their sacrifice," Vinny replied simply. "You take care of their families. You train the next generation to be better than you were. You never forget, but you don't let the grief paralyze you either." These conversations happened regularly. Young warriors, seeking wisdom from an old man who had walked the path they were just beginning. Vinny never turned anyone away, never seemed to tire of sharing the lessons that had cost him so much to learn. The foundation program had grown beyond anyone's expectations. What started as a response to two disrespectful operators had become a cornerstone of military education. Universities began studying its methods, and other countries requested assistance in developing similar programs. But for Vinny, the real success was measured in smaller moments. When he'd get a letter from a former student who had applied one of his lessons in combat, or when someone like Martinez would visit to show how they'd grown since their first encounter. The tattoo on his arm had faded even more over the years, but its meaning had only grown stronger. It had become a bridge between generations, a symbol of continuity in a world that often seemed to value only what was new and high-tech. As evening approached, Vinny would often sit on his porch and think about his 12 brothers who hadn't made it home from that jungle 50 years ago. They had died believing their sacrifice would mean something, that future generations would build on what they had started. Looking at the young faces that still sought him out, Vinny knew their faith had been justified. On a crisp autumn morning, exactly 6 years after the incident at Rosie's diner, Vincent Romano sat in his garden, watching the sun rise over the North Carolina pine. At 89, his movements were slower, his voice quieter, but his mind remained sharp as the day he'd earned his faded tattoo. A car pulled into his driveway. General Hayes, now retired, but still carrying herself with military bearing. She'd taken to visiting monthly, checking on her old comrade, and sharing coffee while they remembered the men who hadn't made it home. "Morning, Patricia," Vinny said without looking up from the tomato plants he was tending. "Morning, Vincent. How are the vegetables coming along?" "Better than I am," he replied with a dry chuckle. "But they'll feed the neighbors through winter, so that's something." They sat in comfortable silence, two old warriors who had shared experiences that couldn't be explained to those who hadn't lived them. Finally, Hayes, "The new class graduated last week. Best group we've had yet. They asked me to thank you for the foundation you helped build." Vinny nodded slowly. "Those young operators understand something their predecessors didn't, that being elite isn't just about what you can do, it's about understanding the shoulders you're standing on." "Briggs got promoted to first sergeant," Hayes mentioned. "He's running the foundation program full-time now. Says it's the most important job he's ever had. Good for him. That boy had potential once he learned some humility." A comfortable silence settled between them again. Hayes watched her old friend tend his garden with the same methodical precision he'd once applied to impossible missions in impossible places. "Vincent," she said finally, "do you ever regret it? The secrecy, the anonymity. You could have had recognition, medals, book deals." Vinny was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands gentle with the plants. "The mission was never about recognition, Patricia. It was about service, about making sure the next generation could do their jobs better than we did ours." He gestured toward the faded tattoo on his arm. "This mark isn't about what I accomplished, it's about what we all accomplished together. The men who didn't make it home, they're still part of every lesson we teach, every young operator who benefits from what we learned." Hayes understood. Their generation had fought not for glory or recognition, but for the simple truth that freedom required guardians willing to stand watch in the shadows. As she prepared to leave, Hayes handed Vinny an envelope from the command. The presidential unit citation for Project Phoenix was finally declassified, 50 years late, but officially recognized. Vinny accepted the envelope but didn't open it. "I'll read it later. Right now, these tomatoes need my attention." As Hayes drove away, Vinny continued his garden. The citation would go in a drawer with other papers that seemed important to other people. What mattered was the garden, the neighbors who would benefit from its harvest, and the knowledge that somewhere, young warriors were learning lessons that would keep them alive and worthy of their calling. The quiet heroes didn't need recognition. They just needed to know their service had mattered.